Nessa and I grew close over the first month of working together. Miguel, one of our cooks, was also sort of a friend of mine. Whenever we had downtime, we'd shoot the breeze with whichever manager or assistant manager was on duty. It felt like a family relationship at times. All was good. We had a dishwasher, Alex, who was around my age. He never fit in with us, but I had never had any negative experiences with him. Miguel, on the other hand, had complained about Alex on a couple of occasions, stating that Alex would sometimes glare at him for no discernible reason, and that he would sometimes see Alex slacking off and talking to himself in the dish room, and would even ignore Miguel whenever he tried to confront him about why he's not washing the cookware that Miguel needed. Nothing serious ever occurred, but out of nowhere, on a relatively relaxed evening, I'm out on the buffet floor assisting a customer with their food. The peaceful atmosphere of the buffet was interrupted by Miguel yelling out in pain. The next thing I heard was a heavy crashing noise that sounded like tons of metal cookware falling onto the floor. The other line server, Jeremy, Vanessa, and I ran back to find Miguel sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by several pieces of cookware holding his chest. He stabbed me. Oh! He struggled to yell out in pain, holding his chest when I saw blood on his shirt and hand. I got on my phone and called 911 while Jeremy ran for the first aid kit. The assistant manager came into the kitchen and asked what had happened. Miguel, struggling still, said that Alex stabbed him. The assistant manager ran around looking for Alex, but to no avail. When the police and ambulance arrived, they came through the back door, and everyone on duty continued to work since there were still guests in the buffet. Some of them asked what had happened, but since we didn't want to make anyone feel uneasy, they said there was an accident in the kitchen, but nothing serious. Miguel was taken to the hospital while the assistant manager gave the police as much information about Alex as he could. The rest of the evening was somber. Myself, along with pretty much everyone working that evening, were shaken up by what had happened. I had teared up several times over the course of the rest of my shift, while Vanessa actually broke down while at the cash register, which prompted some looks of concern from some of the nearby guests. When closing time came and there were no more guests left, the assistant manager gathered us all together to talk about what had happened and told us that he was notified that Alex had been apprehended before we went our separate ways. Miguel ended up fully recovering and came back to work a week later, and life went on as normal. None of us ever figured out what drove Alex to suddenly turn violent, but I'm just glad that he was put away before he could harm others. This all happened over the course of a few years. I was around 16 when this first started, living at home with my mom in a small town in the UK. I'd just gotten a job at a supermarket about a 15-minute walk from my house. My mom was a manager there, but we worked different shifts, so I'd often walk to and from work alone. The route I would take to work took me through a back alley behind our house that separates our housing estate from the main busy road. This back alley then turns into an opening that is surrounded by trees and bushes. Often as a kid, I would find dirty needles and beer cans littering the ground amongst the trees, where me and my friends would play hide and seek around there. It became so much of a problem at one point that our housing estate rallied together to clean it all up and cut back the overgrowing weeds, nettles, and bushes in hopes our local council would create a safe place for our children to play. It never happened, and over the years it was now gone right back to how it was, despite all the hopes and effort that was put into that neighborhood project. At night, that opening became very sinister. There were no lights, and you'd often feel like something, or more likely someone, is watching you from behind the trees. It was a favorite for drug addicts and drunks, so eventually my mom stopped us playing around there and would get mad if she ever caught us trying to sneak through the alley. We were kids and curious and would usually find any opportunity to do exactly what our parents told us not to do, but being 16, I was not a kid per se anymore, and it was the quickest route to work. So it began with just a feeling. I'd walk through the alley and clearing with a sense someone else was there, but I would just put it down to being alone and paranoid. Eventually, after a few weeks of starting my job, I would hear footsteps behind me. Too scared to look, I'd quicken my pace and be out onto the main road before too long, but nobody would ever follow me out, leaving me feeling a little stupid and scolding myself for letting the paranoia play tricks in my mind. That all changed when I actually saw him. I'd finished my shift at 10 p.m., so it was around 1:15 that I got to the alley. I heard the familiar sound of footsteps, but I had gotten so used to hearing them and seeing nothing, I just ignored it. That was until I heard him cough. I stole a look and noticed a tall, very stocky man directly behind me. It was so dark I couldn't actually see his features other than the fact that he was smiling. I hurried my pace and began to dial my mom's number, but before I knew it, I was clear of the alley and onto my street. I looked behind me one last time and saw the man head off in the opposite direction. He was wearing old tracksuit bottoms while scuffy trainers, a jumper, and a white sports cap. When I got home, my mom asked me about the missed call, but I told her it was just an accident and took myself off for a shower in bed. Why I didn't just tell her, I'll never know. Fast forward a few more months. It had become a regular occurrence to see this guy on my way to work and even on my way home, and a lot of the time he would even follow me up to the supermarket. Me being naive, chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe he was just going to do a bit of shopping. Yeah, it's a bit weird. It always seems to be on the days that I'm working, and at the exact same time I happen to be walking to and from work, but it's not as if though he's stalking me. Things like that don't happen to girls like me, I told myself. Eventually started to spot him inside the supermarket, always standing at the ends of aisles I was working in. He would either pretend he was looking at something on the shelves or quickly run off out of sight. If I was on checkout duty, he would always choose my till to queue up in. Even if others were free and mine was busy, he wouldn't say anything though. Just brush my hand when handing over money to pay for whatever stupid crap he would queue up for. A bar of chocolate or a tin of baked beans. Something he could have easily paid for at a self-checkout where it was quicker and easier. I had become increasingly uncomfortable with the amount of times I would see him and started to realize that this odd behavior wasn't just coincidence or me being paranoid. He was stalking me. On one particular shift during the day, I noticed him again. I was in the pet aisle stacking tins of dog food. He came over to me and asked if I had a dog. I said I didn't and turned my back to him. He said that he had a Jack Russell and asked if I liked Jack Russells. I said yes, I like all dogs, and tried to stand to walk away. He sort of loomed over me and said, "Do you want to come on a dog walk with me?" To which I replied, "Not really, thank you. I've got to get back to work," and speedily walked off towards the staff door that leads to the back offices. I bumped into the security guard on the way, who we'll call Alex, and quickly began to explain to him what had just happened. What he told me literally made my skin crawl. He said he had been following him around for over an hour. It turns out Freaky Jack Russell guy had been following me too. Everywhere I went, hiding behind the aisles and people so I couldn't see him. If I went into the back to get more stock to replenish the shelves, he would wait around near the doors just out of sight and then follow me again. He had even seen him rubbing his crotch while looking at me. This prompted him to radio the boss to alert him what was going on, only to look up and see that he had disappeared. That's when he had gone looking for him but had bumped into me instead. He told me to go into the back, not to worry, and that he was going to kindly ask him to leave. From what I've been told, he wasn't so kind and practically manhandled the guy out of the store while telling him he was barred from ever coming back because he was a creep that got off on stalking 16-year-old girls. After my shift, Alex gave me a lift home, which I was hugely thankful for as I was pretty shook up. A few months later, Alex was sacked for stealing some chicken for his dinner. In his defense, a lot of the staff did it. They'd pick something from the ready-to-eat counter like a sandwich or some chicken wings and would take them straight into the back rather than pay at the tills first. He was just the only one that got caught. Ironic considering he was supposed to be the security guard. Because of this, they hired a new security guard, and almost instantly I began to see Freaky Jack Russell guy back in the store. Alex being the only one apart from me remembering his face, it's like he felt it was safe to come back into the store. Only this time he brought his wife and children with him, every time. So me being me, too soft for my own good, let him to it and didn't tell anyone about him being back. He would still choose my till to go through and would make a big show of kissing his wife and children. I just ignored him and tried to get the transaction over as soon as I possibly could. He would often still turn up in the aisles I was working in, but would always have at least one of his children with him so I didn't say anything. Now at this point it had been close to 2 years that this had all been going on. I was suffering health issues, so had to take a lot of time off of work. I spent a few weeks in the hospital and then a further 12 weeks recovering at home, and then I was eased back into work with a couple of shifts per week, only 4 hours long. It was after one of these shifts at around 10:15 p.m. that I happened to be walking through the clearing again. I was about halfway through when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I swear I nearly jumped out of my skin, did a sort of yelp, and span around to see Freaky Jack Russell guy standing directly behind me, holding a rose. He told me he'd missed me and said he was glad I was better. How he knew, I have no idea. He commented on the fact that I'd lost weight and said he preferred a bit of meat on his women, but that it was okay and he was a good cook and could fatten me up. He then said that he was disappointed that I got new blinds on my bedroom window because it made it harder to see me. Right, okay. So at this point, I've had enough of this guy's crap and said, in no certain terms, to leave me alone, or the next time I saw his wife, I would tell her everything, and then I'd be paying a little visit to the police station if I ever saw his ugly face again. And then I ran. I ran all the way home, locked every door and window behind me. I sat up all night, terrified I'd see him outside my bedroom window. But you know what? It worked. I didn't see him again. I quit my job at the supermarket and bought a car so I wouldn't have to walk down any creepy alleys again. Now I'm 26, so it's been a long time since those days. I was at my sister's house having a catch-up and playing with my nieces when she starts telling me about this guy that had been brought into her work. My sister works in a prison and usually spends her shifts signing new prisoners in and allocating them to their cells. This is an important job because you don't want to put a murderer in with a pedophile. Things could get ugly. Scratch that. You do kind of want to do that, but it would cost her job, so you basically can't. Anyways, this guy that had been brought in was brought in for stalking, assault with a deadly weapon. She said she recognized him instantly as she used to work at the same supermarket petrol station that I worked at. He had followed her home on more than one occasion, until she finally moved out and never saw him again. My sister is 9 years older than me. She said that she had read the details of the case after allocating him to a cell and had gotten his full name to search a photo of him on Facebook to show me. It was him, Freaky Jack Russell guy. He had been following this 17-year-old girl for a while, and she had reported it to the police, but they did nothing. This girl had seen him outside her house and on her way to and from work. She worked at a different supermarket than I did, half an hour from my house. After a particularly late shift, the girl was walking around the back of the store towards the bus stop when somebody grabbed her from behind. He held her knife to her throat and did heinous acts to her there on the wet, cold concrete, right near a main road, but just out of sight so no one could see. After he finished, he kissed her, told her he loved her, and tossed her a rose at her feet before leaving towards the bus stop. The girl watched him sit patiently at the bus stop and actually wait for his bus, as he had done nothing wrong. Then after, he got on the bus and waved at her. Actually waved at her. That guy is another kind of messed up. She rang her mother, who rang the police. They caught him through CCTV images and DNA, and now he's locked up for 6 years. The thing is, could I have stopped that from happening sooner if I had just rang the police and told them what was happening to me? Would they have arrested him sooner? Would it have discouraged him from taking it the step further and actually hurting someone? I do blame myself sometimes. I know this guy is a monster, but I often wonder how his children are and how they turned out. I can't help but be grateful that it didn't happen to me. He did have a rose that night he spoke to me in the alley. Was he planning on doing those depraved things to me as well? A little backstory. When I was 19, I lived with my mom in a ranch-style house on a road that backed up to a large field. On the other side was the main highway. About a half-mile down from me was a loony farmer, and about a mile on the other side of me was pretty much a crack house. I guess someone used to live there, but it was run down. I will say that the crackheads were pretty quiet. Other than those two houses, we were isolated. At the time, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. One of my classes ended at 10:30 p.m. I often wouldn't get home that day of the week until about 11:15ish. I was driving home one night and I noticed some guy walking down the road. He had a yellow shirt and track pants. I remember his outfit because it was stupid. It wasn't weird to see people walking down my road because of the whole crack house thing, but I instinctively look over at him when I drove past. He turned and smiled and waved, which thoroughly freaked me out, so I sped the half-mile home and pulled into the driveway weirded out. I made sure all the doors and windows were secure and then sat on the couch to be a paranoid freak and wait to make sure the dude walked past my house. Except he didn't, and there was another guy with him, dressed in darker clothes. They actually walked up my driveway and started playing around with my car, testing the handles and stuff. In my hurry, I forgot to grab my phone from my car, so I was kind of worried that's what they were after, until the guy in yellow started approaching my door. I'm freaking out, so I go and wake my mom. She's groggy and I'm trying to explain the situation when we both hear the doorknob turn very slowly. Good thing it was deadbolted. She got out of bed, walked to the door, and then Yellow Shirt knocked. I perched up on the couch so I could get a good look at him and his friend still in the driveway. The porch light was on because of the sensor. "Yeah?" my mom said. "You dropped your wallet." I told my mom that I had my wallet. It was in my purse. So she calmly told him that she had her wallet and it was too late to be knocking on people's doors. I remember perfectly what he said next, even though this was about 6 years ago. "Okay, I'm not a bad guy, just so you know." We were all pretty still. No one moved, not even the guy at the door, not even when the porch light went off. Then he tried the handle again. My mom told me to call the cops so she could go get the gun, and I told her I didn't have my phone, so she walked to the kitchen to grab hers from the charger. She handed me the phone and walked to the bathroom, stared out the window into the backyard, then she went to her room to grab her Ruger. I was talking to the police and explaining the situation, all the while watching the two guys, explaining that there were 2 suspicious men at our door when my mom came back and said, "One in our backyard too," which explained why she had looked out the bathroom window. She glimpsed him from the kitchen and went to get a more discreet look. My mom walked back over to the door with her gun and loudly said, "If he tries to handle again, I'm just going to open the door and shoot him." Who knows why she said that instead of waiting for cops to arrive, but the guys took off down the road. I told her and she rushed to the bathroom where the guy apparently in the backyard saw his friend running down the road and sprinted off too. They were going in the direction of the crack house. The cops searched our house and our yard and went to the drug house where they found 5 dudes hanging around. One was the yellow shirt guy and I'm assuming his friends were with him. They did get arrested and nothing weird like that ever happened again, but I was on edge for a while. I still make sure the doors are locked at all times every day, even though I live in a much nicer area now. So I've had crooked teeth my whole life, and I really hadn't minded that much. We couldn't afford braces, so I haven't been to an orthodontist at all. Well, recently my insurance let us know that if I needed braces, they would pay most of the cost. It's state insurance, so we were surprised. My mom jumped at the offer, saying that I should straighten my teeth while I have the chance before I'm a legal adult. So this is my first trip to the orthodontist. I think I should preface by saying that this office was tiny, looked like an old trailer attached to the side of a larger building. We checked in, were led to a room. Everything seemed pretty normal. Well, before he even comes into the room, I hear the orthodontist ask his assistant, "What about tonight? You want to go to dinner tonight?" Sounding annoyed, she replied, "No, someone is picking me up after work." It sounded like this happened before. When he came into the room, the first thing he said was, "What's a cute kid like you doing in a place like this?" Okay. My mom glanced at me for a minute before talking to the doctor. He's just straight up staring at me while she talks to him until he crosses the room to look at pictures of my teeth. He says, "You have beautiful, beautiful teeth." I took it as a compliment the first 5 times he said it, until he added, "Man, I wish those were in my mouth." The commentary after this was equally as weird. He kept saying things like, "You're already beautiful, why do you need straight teeth?" And, "We can't make your teeth straight, you'd have to beat off the boys with a stick." Exact words. Keep in mind that this man is 70 plus, and I'm 16. I look young for my age. This comment was the one that really kinda topped everything off. He put his gloves on, and these were his exact words. "Okay, I'm gonna slide my fingers in your mouth now. I know they taste good and you can lick, but you can't bite." Then he giggled. What? It didn't really get creepier than that, but I don't really know how it could. He talked to my mom a few times about my dentist, said I had beautiful teeth a few more times, and finally left. I don't know if I'm overreacting or misinterpreting, but this really freaked me out. My mom wants me to see another orthodontist, but we can't because of our insurance. If I can figure out a way to see a new one, that would be amazing because I don't want to see this creepy orthodontist guy again. Once upon a time, there was a young man who just got his doctor's diploma. Happy, he began to work. But as the years passed, the police and doctor's order received more and more complaints about his behavior. His hands were constantly trembling. He had a hard time walking straight forward. He'd often tripped. He misunderstood his patients' problems and gave them the wrong medications. And don't ask about the vaccines and collection of blood samples. Yes, that man worked completely inebriated. So the order finally decided he would no longer be a doctor and forbade him to continue healing people. So when this doctor, my doctor, went on vacation, he didn't like to let us without any help. Illnesses don't know holidays after all, so he looked for doctors who could replace him. Since the newbies don't have too many patients, they were the ones that we would often see. But for those 2 particular weeks, it was a middle-aged man who came. Who cares? He's got his diploma and all, and he would be able to help us while our doctor was away. So here I am, 12 years old with pain in my foot. It was hurting so bad I could barely put it on the floor. So we went to see the man. He was kind and examined me. He manipulated my foot harshly and rapidly switched to my arm. He manipulated it for a long time, asking me if that hurt me. Does it hurt? No. And if I do this? Of course no. Maybe like this. Why would it hurt? Because it's painful. Well, I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't really say what he was doing, but it still looked weird for me. Then he prescribed me some Stilnox. If you don't know what that is, it's used for insomnia. Yeah. Anyway, we didn't know this thing, so we left and I took some. In the hours that followed, my foot was still as painful as before. But oh well, Rome wasn't built in one night. My mom asked me to give her an empty box that was by my side. I lifted it, lowered my eyes, and I saw them. This giant mass of crawling bugs in this box. I yelled and threw that away. Wondering what was going on, my mom fetched it and examined it. How can you have that thing in your hands? What? It's just a box. The bugs. There's insects crawling everywhere. It's empty, look. She showed me the inside of it. But for me, those disgusting creatures were still there. She put her hand in and moved it here and there. It passed through the bugs as if they were immaterial. They didn't try to climb on her arm, nor were they disturbed by the hand. What's wrong with me? I only drank water, didn't eat what she ate. I wasn't on drugs. As I wondered what was going on, we decided to put on our Christmas decorations. That would help me think about something else, I suppose. So I decorated the tree, well, the bottom since I was on the chair. I couldn't stand up too long, but once again I was freaked out. Hands, white hands sticking out of the tree, waving a little as they were trying to fetch something. We could pass through them, of course, as if they were ghosts, just like the bugs. Man, I was having severe hallucinations right now. If you search the web for this medication, you'd see it was the cause. But we had no internet at this time, so we had to read what was written on the box. Composition, posology, but for the side effects, good luck. Only some common things were written, so nothing about hallucinations. So we go back to the doctor the day after, but for now I had to live with that. I would stand the creepy hands, but the bugs, God. So my mom helped me go into my bedroom. Do you see something here? No visions. Then stay here. If something shows up, call me. I saw other things during the night. It was long, but everything was gone in the morning. We went back to the doctor. What did you give her? She freaked out the whole night because of hallucinations. Oh, okay. and she might have a problem there too. He gave me another medication, Abilify. What is this? It's used for schizophrenic and bipolar people, but we didn't know. So I took it and went to school. I still couldn't put my foot on the floor, but I had no choice. During the first hour, I felt irritated. Everything was getting on my nerves. But after that, I slowly began to suffocate. I couldn't breathe, as if a bubble void was forming around me. So I breathed harder, thinking it was going to disappear in a few minutes. My comrades near me were annoyed by the noise I made, so the teacher put me away in the back of the classroom. It got worse. As I was lacking air, my vision blurred and darkened. I felt like I was going blind. Then I heard my surroundings as if my head was put in a jar. I panicked a little, and I began to feel like ants were running through my body. And then, I had no ability to stand at all, so I collapsed on the table. I was still conscious, so I heard the teacher tell me this wasn't bedtime. "I ain't sleeping, sir. I don't feel good," I said, but I couldn't speak clearly. He approached me and realized what was going on. I finally woke up in a hospital bed. The doctors there said I could have died if my school didn't phone them in time. My mom was here too and already told them about my foot, Stilnox, and the Abilify. "Do you have problems with your sleep?" "No, why? Were you diagnosed schizophrenic or bipolar?" "No." "Then you shouldn't be taking those medications. Who was sick enough to give them to you?" "I don't know his name. Dr. Trey asked him to take his place while he was on holiday." I stayed some days in the hospital. When I got out, our real doctor was back, so we went to tell him. He was shocked. He reported him to the order, and guess what they told him? This man has been banned years ago from the doctor's community. Yup, this guy who put my life in danger was the doctor I told you about earlier. Even now, I still have a crisis where I can't breathe anymore. It isn't as violent as it was, but it still is horrible. I don't know if they did harm to others as well, and if they reported him too, but he deserves to go to jail, since he can't refrain from practicing. So the wife has a friend with a daughter that is friends with my daughter, and she was going back home out of state. We decided to cook on the grill and buy a cake. I'm grilling and my wife tells me that they are on their way over and she is bringing her boyfriend with her. I already had some thing about him and kind of didn't want him over. I heard that he likes to fight women and his stepdaughter said he can be mistreating to her and being mean. That first thing that happened kind of bothered me, but I had no proof, and my wife and her friend went to the store to get the cake and left him and the kids with us. The kids were on the back playing and were sitting in my garage watching college football. He asked if he can use the restroom and I told him sure. He was gone for some time. I didn't think anything of it. Later he came back out asking me my name. I told him, and he kept saying no, your real name, and tried to pronounce my name. So that struck me as odd, and I remember my wallet was on the television stand in the living room. I go to find my wallet laying open. Nothing was missing, but I do think he was looking at my driver's license. I'm outside and watching the game, and my wife comes to get me and tells me this guy is acting up and to come and get him out of the house. I go and, trying to be nice, talk to him, and he starts cursing at me and all this and telling me he don't need me in here, talking to me and to go back outside where I was. This made me mad, but I didn't want to have a conflict in front of the kids, so I was still trying to calm him down. He kept going on, and now I was getting angry. I say it's time to go or we got a problem. His wife told him let's go and steps in front of him. He pushes her onto the floor. I push him towards the door and he tries to grab me by the neck. I back off and told him I'm going to hit him if he doesn't leave. His wife again comes to get in between and talk some sense into him. He hits her closed-fisted and she falls to the floor. I blanked out. All I remember is a left hook to the jaw dropping him and women and kids screaming. I snapped out of it and he was on the ground and I was standing over him punching. He gets up screaming, saying he's going to end my entire family the next time he comes back. I tried to go back at him, but my wife told me to just let it go. I didn't call the police out of fear that I would get in trouble for the confrontation, but thankfully, we haven't seen him since. I'm a 17-year-old girl now, but I was 16 at the time. As a little background info, I lived in a pretty ghetto neighborhood in a very run-down apartment complex with no shortage of creeps and junkies. It was just like every other normal day. After getting dressed and ready for school, I would walk out the door and wait by the canal in an alleyway that was maybe 10 meters away from where I lived, so it wasn't very far. I would always feed the ducks that would swim in the canal until my friend Anthony would meet me, so we would walk to school together. I was just standing there feeding the ducks in complete silence. After a few minutes, I turned around to see a man wearing a dark hoodie and a black mask with holes cut so I could only see his eyes and mouth, standing literally right behind me. I had no idea how long he had been standing there because I didn't even hear a sound. He was so close that he could grab me with just one move. We kind of stared at each other for a moment. At first he looked very emotionless and just stared me dead in the eyes. Then he kind of smirked, which really creeped me out. I didn't even move because I felt like if he did, he would grab me before I could make a sound. The weirdest thing happened though. Instead, he turned around and ran towards the wall behind him, jumped over it. I was honestly so confused but relieved. I could barely comprehend what had just happened. I still stood there trying to add things up in my head like, why did he run away? And what would have happened if I never turned around? There's one more thing that makes this encounter more creepy though. When my friend finally came, I told him what had just happened. He seemed concerned but figured it wasn't anything serious, maybe some creep trying to scare me since he ran away. Maybe that's all it was. But as we were walking to school, a police car slowed down and asked us if we'd seen a man in a mask and questioned me for a bit about my encounter. I have no idea what that guy was up to. I still wish I had asked the officer what was going on, but that definitely was one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had. So last year I was heading to this lady's house to pet sit after I stopped for gas. Afterwards, I was going to meet one of my friends to have her follow me and stay the night. I stupidly waited until nighttime to get my gas and stopped at the pump farthest from the store. I like to think I'm a pretty observant person, or just completely paranoid, so I immediately noticed an older guy to my right walking around as I waited for my tank to fill up. I politely smiled to avoid awkward eye contact, and he quickly approached me. He stopped a few feet in front of me and said, "Hey, I was wondering if you could give me a ride. I don't have a car and I'm not that far from here." I said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, I can't," to which he became a little agitated. I nervously eyed him before he said, "Oh well, that's alright. I've got a granddaughter and I wouldn't want her to drive a stranger. Have a good night." I didn't understand why he would ask in the first place if he knew it was creepy, but I put the cap back on the gas tank without taking my eyes off of him. I got into my car and started driving away. When I looked at my rearview mirror and noticed him getting into the driver's side of an old pickup truck parked in an unlit and secluded area on the side of the gas station, I immediately got nervous because he had just told me he didn't have a car. I was meeting my friend just across the street at McDonald's, so there wasn't a huge window of opportunity for me to lose him. I kept watching the truck as I parked at McDonald's and quickly texted my friend to hurry up. As I was sitting in my car, I saw the old truck pull into the McDonald's and go to the opposite side of the parking lot. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but as I looked back towards the other side, I noticed the old man walking around the building to where I was parked. As soon as he saw my car, he crouched down behind a bush, and I assumed he was waiting for me to get out. I panicked, and as soon as my friend pulled in a few seconds later, I told her what happened, and we peeled out of the parking lot as quickly as possible. I'll never forget that when I looked back to see if he had gotten into the truck to follow us, he was standing in the grass next to the road, watching me leave. I attend high school at a religious college preparatory school. My school has this nice wooded area surrounding it, and if you follow either way in or out of the school, you'll end up in a little shopping area in front of the school. I like to take long walks through the woods to help clear my mind or just be alone for a bit. However, I'm not sure if I can ever step foot in those woods without thinking about what happened tonight. There was a home football game this evening. My brother wanted to go, and naturally my parents forced me to go. Law of twins, the worst law. I only stayed for about 2 periods or quarters before walking around and forcing myself to socialize a little bit. Even though I didn't like most of them, it was better than football. During the 4th quarter or something like that, I asked my brother if I can go back to the car, which was parked in the shopping area across the way, so I can start it up and be ready to go by the time he walks over. He gives me the keys to our shared car, and I make my way to the car. While I'm walking through the parking lot, I decided to take a quicker shortcut through the woods, and that's when the craziness starts. I swear I could hear someone walking behind me, but every time I turn around, I was met with an empty trail. I found this odd, but dismissed it as paranoia. I kept walking, but I began to feed this paranoia, and eventually, I was able to convince myself to speed up to a brisk pace so I can avoid getting snatched up by this invisible threat that was pursuing me. As I sped up, I realized the footsteps I kept hearing wasn't my mind screwing with me, but actual reality. I looked behind me to see a guy in a black hoodie sprinting after me. Panicked, I began to pick up my pace. I could see the edge of the woods and the lights of the shopping center before 2 other hooded guys jump out in front of me, forcing me to take a left and into uncharted territory. I could hear all 3 of them screaming obscenities at me. I didn't even know who these guys were. Their voices were filled with the strongest of spite and the darkest of intent. It was horrifying. I wouldn't wish the experience upon my enemies. Eventually, I found myself in a neighborhood at the northern end of the woods and turned around to see nothing chasing me. I stopped to catch my breath and cried. I couldn't help myself. The words they said were too violent, even if they were just teens or adults. I didn't know if they were empty or a promise to something I could see in the future. Eventually, I calmed myself down and walked myself to the stores across the street, found my car, and locked the doors the second I got inside. I didn't even use my phone. I just scanned the area around me, making sure those creeps didn't follow me. The following story occurred in June of 2017. For some context, I live in a fairly major city bordering a great lake, and I live pretty much right on the coast, about 3 or so blocks inland off the lake. I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend of 5 years, Julia, and our 2 goofy cats. We both work full-time. She makes chocolate, and for now, I'm driving delivery. We spend our idle hours playing video games together and making snacks in our cozy little window in the skyline. Neither of us earns much, but we do well enough to get by most of the time and take each other on the occasional night out for drinks, dinner, movies, or all of the above. About 2 weeks before this story's events occurred, I had just lost a relatively high-paying job as a writer in a suburb of town. It was my first real job out of college. Anyway, on my first few days with no work to go to, I made a habit out of driving down to a nice spot on the lake. It was just a circular parking lot, nothing special, but it brought you close enough to the lake where you could see it without getting out of the car. It was just a tranquil place to hang out and spend some time. That day, I had gone there specifically to look at the lake and watch the James Comey hearings on my phone, while occasionally switching to the Indeed app to send in some resumes. After I had been there for an hour, I decided it was probably time to head home. As I backed out of the circular parking lot, I felt the sudden, irrepressible urge to look behind me. When I did, I saw a light blue late model Hyundai pull in and the driver was staring intensely at me. I looked away, assuming it was just an awkward moment as these things usually are. When I looked again, he was still locked on me. I exited the parking lot, thinking he'd only just pulled in and was thus unlikely to immediately leave. I glanced in my rearview mirror as I drove away from the parking lot, and just as I was about to turn the corner, I saw that light blue Hyundai pull out and follow in my direction. Again, I brushed it off. Certainly it's a coincidence. Maybe he got to the lot and there was too many people there for his liking. What do I know, right? I decided that, just to be safe, I would take a few odd turns on my way home just to ensure he isn't following me. There are 2 main roads in my town that are parallel to one another with small residential streets bracing them. I took a path on these main roads and down side streets that nobody could have simply mimicked by chance. But after every turn, I would look back, and there he was. Right turn, look into the rear view, there he is. Left turn, take a look, there he is again. My heart flutters a little bit. as I start to realize something may actually be going on here. Now, I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'11", 165 pounds, soaking wet. I'm not a pushover, and I'd be prepared to defend myself, but I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't avoid that outcome at all costs if I could help it. Bravado is a stupid reason to get killed. After he had followed me for far too long, I was totally fed up and decided to do something to decisively determine what was happening. I decided I'd pull into a gas station and up to a pump with a clear path in front of me. That way, he would have to follow me there or buzz off. I was hoping for the latter option, but I had no such luck. I pulled up to the pump, leaving my car in drive just in case I had to peel out of there. He pulls in behind me and up to the adjacent pump. His windows were so tinted I couldn't see inside. He had them down at the parking lot when I saw him staring. I begrudgingly lowered my window and he did the same, revealing his old, sunken face. He couldn't have been too much older than 50 to 55, but this guy's face was sort of messed up. I felt a primal negative reaction to him immediately. It was powerful and it stifled me. Seconds later, I managed to find my voice. "Can I help you with something?" I half shouted. "You think I didn't notice you following me? What do you want?" His face grows angry and red before he simply replies, "No, you're not her." He speeds away, tires screeching. At this point, I'm more confused than before. I'm angrier than before. I decided to call the police to report the incident. The dispatcher directed me to the park authorities. The officer asked if I would be willing to meet him down at the parking lot where the incident began to give a statement. Of course, I obliged. I drove directly there with new confidence. Even if he followed me back there, the cops are meeting me there. Problem solved, I thought to myself. I pulled into the parking lot and picked a spot in direct line of sight of the entrance so that the officer could easily spot me when he arrived. I was flipping through my phone to kill idle time while I waited for the officer when I glanced up from my phone and, wouldn't you know it, that same light blue Hyundai was pulling into the lot. I couldn't believe it. Still, I remained unafraid. He did a circle around the lot and exited directly. It was as if he was just sweeping the area. Maybe he was looking for somebody. Finally, the officer showed up a few minutes later. I gave him the rundown of what had just happened, then told him he had just been in the lot. 30 seconds later, the idiot pulls in the lot again. I point the car out to the officer and impulsively shouted, "That's him!" before I remembered who I was talking to. The officer gave me a look of surprise and flagged the car down and directed it to pull into a parking spot and to turn the car off. He spent about 10 minutes talking to the guy. When he walked back over, he informed me that the man had said that I was doing something creepy and he wanted to make sure I wasn't going to hurt anybody. I have to admit to chuckling a little bit at the accusation. The officer reassured me, though. They knew of this guy, but he didn't say what for. All he said was that the man was shaking and asking to apologize by the time the officer escorted him home. The man was told that he was not welcome back to the park due to his past behavior and following me all over town. I felt justice was applied and drove home happily, albeit indirectly. That night, my girlfriend and I were sitting on our third-story balcony, smoking cigarettes and sipping on beers around 2 a.m. We were just talking and enjoying being home together with no chores or obligations on our backs. The stress of unemployment was momentarily dulled to a whisper in the back of my mind. But then we saw it. The light blue Hyundai, or at least what I thought was the light blue Hyundai, idling on the street. It was 2 houses down from our apartment building and we were certainly visible. Of course, I'd already told Julia about what happened that day in detail, so when I put my finger to my lips and subtly gestured toward the idling car in the street, she understood what was happening. "I think that's the same car," I said. "I can't be certain, but it's definitely the same make and model." It was too dark to make out the exact color. The shade of light blue could have easily been confused with white at nighttime. I had written his license plate number in the notes of my phone and squinted to try to make the plate out from a distance. I could tell that the first 2 digits and the last matched, and that was enough for me. I called the police and explained the entire situation. As I'm talking to the dispatcher, the car slowly pulls away. The dispatcher tells me that there are officers nearby and they will come inspect the area. I tell her that the car pulled off, but she reassured me that there were units very nearby and they would look for him. They never found the car, and I triple-checked my locks that night. Nothing else abnormal occurred. After a few weeks had passed by, Julia and I had all but forgotten about the odd and somewhat scary encounter. We both had a sweet tooth late one night and decided to just hit the gas station on the corner for some crappy snacks and Gatorade. I needed gas anyways. Julia drove to the station, and I went into the store to get the goodies. As I was walking out of the store towards Julia in the car, I looked over and see that ugly blue Hyundai pulling in, and that man is staring Julia down. I stared directly at him, and he meets my gaze. I just stared and stared. I wanted him to know I saw him. I get to the car quickly and corral Julia inside. I lock the doors and explain what was going on. We're both pretty freaked out at this point, but doing our best to stay composed. We pull out and drive randomly under the assumption we're being followed. We dial the cops again, and they send out more cars to look. Nothing came of it, and we haven't seen the guy since. The only information we learned was that the park rangers knew him because he had been caught following women around the trails of the park, particularly women with headphones on who were walking or jogging alone. Something my girlfriend likes to do. His debacle with me was the last straw, and that is why he was banned from the park. My impression is that he has seen Julia driving my car around town, as he often does, and saw what he liked. Having associated her with my car, it would explain why he followed me, hoping it was her. It's impossible to be sure, I guess. The police told us that he would keep us posted if anything came of it, but just told us to call if we saw him near us again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these narrations and wish to support the channel further, feel free to join me on Patreon, where for $1 or more a month you'll get early access to all future narrations before they release on YouTube. And be sure to send your creepy experiences in to letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might just hear them on the next video. Thanks so much, and I'll see you again soon.